Welcome, everybody, to the American Space Museum. We're here in our Space Shuttle gallery with astronaut Mike McCulley.
Hello,
Welcome, Mike.
happy to be here.
He's happy to be here. I'm Mark Marquette, and I'm even happier to be here with one of our wonderful supporters of the American Space Museum, Mike McCulley here, who is a pilot on STS-34 in 1989 that sent the Galileo spacecraft on an incredible fact-finding mission to Jupiter. And we're going to talk some about that and some of his friends in the shuttle era, but also want you to understand what a wonderful and revered manager Mike McCulley has been during the Space Shuttle era, and he ended his career with the United Space Alliance. So we've already heard from some of you USA workers out there, and we'd love to hear more from you. Marty Winkles behind the camera as usual. He's our space worker hero here at the American Space Museum, having worked on the lunar module for Grumman and then 30-some years in the shuttle launch systems with the engines. Marty, you see someone popping up there, shout out a question for us there. And we'll tie Marty into Mike McCulley here as we go along the way. But Mike, we're so glad to have you here. You spend some of your time around here, live on the Space Coast.
I do.
And we are just grateful for what you do. This is your third September in a row to visit our museum.
Going to be a habit.
Last year he was playing with chasing a white ball with golf sticks at a country club that we had a fundraiser at. And then 3 years ago you helped us dedicate our women in space gallery that includes two of your crewmates, Shannon Lucid and Ellen Baker. On there, and we had a good time that time 3 years ago.
We did.
A lot of people here, and of course the pandemic, we can't do these things. That's why we created Stay Curious, to help reach out to you all, and we make no bones about it that we need bushel baskets full of these guys here, Benjamins, to keep our museum open. And there's lots of ways you can contribute to this nonprofit. We are the museum is the foundation of we're the arm of the U.S. Space Walk of Fame Foundation that 20 years ago started Space View Park, just a few blocks away from we're sitting here in our shuttle gallery in downtown Titusville. So you can go to our website, americanspacemuseum.org. Up at the top, we've got a donate button, or call us and we can make arrangements how you can help other people stay curious when we can come to our museum. And we're hoping to open our museum, Mike, September 21st on a limited basis. So when you're out there eating a good meal at the Slow and Low and people want to know where to go,
send them up here.
Send them up here. We're going to be open on a limited basis. By the way, I had that turkey leg at Slow and Low. It's pretty good.
I get that thing and eat it all afternoon. Hey, are we both on camera at the same time here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we are. And between us here, we've got this COVID-safe plexiglass. Thank you, Clay Locke of Coastal Windows and Tints over here on Hopkins Road here in Titusville. He's the gentleman that we called up and said we need a plexiglass to talk to some of our space workers and astronaut guests, and he brought it off and said no charge. So thank you, Clay Locke at Coastal Windows and Tint. If you're local, give them a check out there.
Good for him.
So, but yes, we've had a couple people. This has become a popular show, and this gentleman, who, by the way, is the luckiest man in the world, and he'll tell you why, right?
I am the luckiest man alive.
That's right, and he has no footprint on social media, so don't even try, okay? And that can be a good thing.
This is my initial introduction to Facebook.
Yes,
and all associated with it.
Well, you've got a challenge from some other space workers we've had here, like your friend Janine Pape.
Oh my goodness, my hero.
And Janine, you can talk about Janine if you want. We had the Connolly brothers here, and we've had Ed Baker and some other guys here, men and women. And this is what we're trying to do is take people into this 30-year legacy of the space shuttle that'll never be repeated in our lifetime, Mike. And he was a part of it as an astronaut, but he was a bigger part of it, I think, as a manager, because I think we needed a manager like Mike McCulley the last 20 years of the Space Shuttle to accomplish the things we did, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. So,
Yeah, that was an interesting decision, by the way, to leave the astronaut corps. There's two things really difficult about the astronaut corps. One's getting there, and the other's leaving.
right.
The rest of the stuff, you just work hard and do it.
We had your first flight in 1989. Excuse me. We got to first introduce you by saying boiler up. And you Purdue
Yep.
grads know what
Boiler
that
up.
means.
Yeah,
He's
we
a
did.
proud Purdue grad. What, 25 of you?
Something like that, including the Alpha and the Omega Moon in Neil, who was a very,
Yeah.
very strong mentor of mine coming
Neil
up.
Armstrong was the first man on
And
the moon, the
Gene
last man
Cernan.
on the moon, Gene Cernan.
I was an ensign in flight school when I met Gene Cernan, who was coming back from the moon, and Gene and I stayed close for the next 40 years or so. So I
Wow.
had two wonderful mentors out of those Purdue graduates, and we've had several reunions back at Purdue, which have always been a lot of fun.
You ever been to Tom Stafford's museum in Weatherford, where Gene Cernan had a lot to do with that?
I haven't.
Oh, it's awesome. When you go through Tennessee again,
Yeah,
and you grew up in Franklin,
Livingston.
Livingston, Tennessee, and that's near where?
It's halfway between Nashville and Knoxville on the Kentucky border.
Okay, all right. Well, you go Interstate 40 and go west.
Mm-hmm.
It's just past Oklahoma City and Weatherford. Tom Stafford's got an awesome museum. You and your wife Jane will enjoy that on your next cross
Well,
country trip.
Actually, I'm going to be coming back through Oklahoma late November in there someplace this year. I'll take that and
Look that up.
will.
Yeah, I'll remind you later.
Okay.
'Cause the Oklahoma City Science Museum has the train wreck, the command module
Yep.
that they trained in for Apollo command module. I'm
So
talking
actually,
about,
the reason I'm probably going to be in Oklahoma is because Jane is a big fan of Ray Drummond from the Cooking Channel,
Oh,
the
okay.
Pioneer Woman, and she has a place in Pulaski or something, Oklahoma, that's Jane has put on our itinerary.
Wow.
So I'll be in that area.
Well, we got a couple. I got a couple when we announced this on Facebook and so forth, and we got this email this morning. It says, "Hi, Mikey from Marcia and Doug Follick, Follick, SSME Rocketdyne that
Yep.
sent you up there."
Yep.
So
Good
from the
engines.
Follocks, they're saying hi to you.
Oh.
And another friend of mine that was a space worker, he said, "Good luck and say hello to Captain Happy." This is a very happy gentleman for sure. And,
the guy who put that tag on me though meant it as an insult, actually.
oh, he did.
Yeah.
Okay.
He was trying to intimidate me when I was fairly new at Lockheed. It didn't work, by the way.
Didn't work, by the way.
And I actually loved the title, although you would remember who he is, Marty, if I told you, but I don't need to do that. But it was meant as an insult originally.
And of course, Marty Winkle worked for Mike McCulley at United Space Alliance, and Mike was also the Lockheed Martin launch site director. And it's taken a while for me to figure out all these companies, but I finally got my hold on that. Rockwell had the contract first, right, on the shuttle.
They
And then-
built it.
Pardon me?
They built it.
Yeah, they built it. And then who had the first contract to run it? And then Lockheed.
Rockwell had the first
Yeah,
contract.
Rockwell.
Yeah.
And then went to Lockheed Martin, and then it went to USA. And you came on board with Lockheed Martin
I did.
right after your space shuttle
I did.
launch, and as a launch director, launch site director over. So this man has seen a lot of crews, a lot of shuttles go off. When you were president of United Space Alliance, I counted about 42 shuttles that went off in there. But before we get too far away from that, I told Mike McCulley that astronaut birthdays are really popular and fun for us here. And here's our birthday boy today, one of your astronaut friends, Woody Spring. There, Woody Spring is 76 years old today,
Go Army.
I believe, and he's a Go Army guy,
Yeah,
huh?
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
he's just a little younger than you, and we celebrate these birthdays. And Mike, you had your birthday August 4th, I remember, and we celebrated you. Somebody else had a birthday on that date, but it's amazing.
The
Sometimes
Queen
there'll be-
Mother.
Sometimes
The Queen Mother was August 4th.
Oh,
She
okay.
passed a few years ago.
Sometimes there'll be 3 or 4 astronauts at once that are born, and you go, "What's up?" With that. So
There is somebody else, but I've forgotten who.
happy birthday Woody Spring there, and he had an early shuttle mission, I think 51 something, and he did 2 spacewalks that were pretty instrumental in figuring out how they were going to build the space station and do things in that payload.
He had a great
right?
family too. He was a really good guy to be a teammate with.
So he was one of your friends, but he was in the class, astronaut class behind you, class 9, and you were in class 10.
He was in front of us. He was the 1980 selection.
And your class selection was called the Maggots, right?
Well,
About
there's a
17
story.
of you were called the Maggots.
We were actually down in Homestead. It's from the comic strip, Shoe.
Oh, okay.
That's where
all
it
right,
came
the comic
from.
strip shoe. Okay.
Well, we were at Homestead Air Force Base for some survival training, and those Air Force guys took great delight in embarrassing us, putting us down, making fun of us. It was their opportunity because we were the students, the astronaut class, and they were just picking on us unmercifully. Bill Shepard was the one in our class who said, "You know, this is just like the comic strips," because the Maggots are always being yelled at by the Shoe comic strip, so we became that day Maggots. And in the classroom we were in, there were all these little desks that we were sitting at, and each one had a number. And they weren't in any order at all. It was just numbers had been on those desks somewhere back along the line. And so we looked around at our desk, and I became Maggot 29. There's no significance to that at all, except that happened to be the desk I was in. And so there are 17 of us with 17 different numbers that came out of that little classroom in Homestead Air Force Base.
I meant to bring the picture. That there was an outside picture, and you're standing beside Kathy Thornton, dwarfing her like you're a tall astronaut. You were pushing the limits there, weren't you?
Well, no, Weatherby was the tallest in our
Weatherby?
group. He was around 6'4".
Okay.
I was 6'1", maybe a little over.
Okay. But yes, so you were in that astronaut class, and then but when you went to space with STS-34 as a pilot, you became the first submariner in space. So tell us about your Navy career, and how did you jump out of the water into the air?
Well, I grew up in a little small town, Tennessee. Got out of high school on a Friday night, 17 years old, no money. Grades were okay, but not great. Monday morning, I was in Great Lakes, Illinois, in boot camp. And my purpose was the GI Bill and learn a trade. Mm-hmm. That's what I went up there for. And then at boot camp, I was just fine in boot camp. And then I went off and started doing some other things. And then had the opportunity, I've forgotten the guy's name that talked me into it, but applied for submarines, and that was an all-volunteer. And at that point in my life, my age, my immaturity, a submarine was a perfect place for me to be. The teamwork, and I spent 72 days submerged on the USS Ulysses Grant and Ulysses S. Grant. And those were just great days for me because I went from an enthusiastic and dumb and reckless kid to discipline and teamwork. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I knew about teams from football teams and Boy Scouts and things like that. But submarines got me to the point where I could apply for this college program. Took 3 tries, by the way. And because by that point I'd made up my mind that I was going to stay in the Navy, but if I was going to stay, I wanted to be an officer, so I needed to go to college. And then three tries. I have a granddaughter who just graduated from Vanderbilt, and I told her this story one time that I tried 3 times to get into Vanderbilt and failed all 3 times. Mm-hmm. And she graduated with honors here this past spring.
In Nashville.
In Nashville, and she's off to medical school now.
Wow. Well, you know, 120 days in a submarine, 5 days in space. I mean, there's a wall between you and death. I mean, you're one of the few people that have experienced that type of isolation. So I know, you know, the older you get, you don't look back on that sort of stuff. But somebody told me that you've got a good story about how being a Boy Scout got you out of trouble in the submarine.
Well, it was it's the reason I'm sitting here right now.
All right.
As I mentioned a few minutes ago, I was dumb and enthusiastic in the wrong ways in my first few years in the Navy while I was growing up. And I actually, in the military, the non-judicial punishment in the Navy, it's called captain's mast. And I have the distinction of going to captain's mast. I was a third-class petty officer, and he gave me a suspended bust and put me on restriction for a while. And so a year or two later, I was on temporary duty in Charleston, South Carolina, and I was applying for this college program. And there were 3 officers that were doing this interview, and 2 of them were on my side. From the beginning of the interview, I could tell. But one guy was really hung up on the fact that I had been through some disciplinary action in my early days in the Navy. And I knew intuitively that if you didn't have unanimous consent among those 3 guys at this interview, you weren't going to get there. And so the other 2 guys are trying to bring out positive stuff, and the guy's grumping and growling, and he keeps coming back to this. And then he said, "Wait a minute." And he's got my record in front of him. "You were an Eagle Scout?" "Yes, sir." He slammed that record closed and said, "We're done." He got up and left, and it was unanimous among the 3 of them that I'd be selected for the scholarship program that sent me to Purdue. And it was that simple.
Wow. So you knew how to tie knots and make fire out of stones and all that. That's great. That's a really neat story. And there are a lot of astronauts have been Eagle Scouts. I know a baby boomer that I am. That was a big deal about the
Well, there's a
Mercury
poster someplace that it was a black poster, and it's got crew patches on it. And the tagline on this poster says, "Before they did this, they did this."
Wow.
And it's all Eagle Scouts. And in the first, 50 missions, I don't know where it is, but it goes back to Alan Shepard and those guys. But it was a really, really good Boy Scout poster.
I'll look for that. We, in our eBay world and auction world that we do to keep our doors open, it's amazing the posters that are out there. So many posters. If you bring posters in our museum, we're going to charge you $25 to leave them here. but you know that Snoopy poster. We've got it in the room. You'll look around here. There's a Snoopy become the mascot of safety for the shuttle era, and there's a yellow poster with just Snoopy on it, and that's worth $200.
Wow.
All day long. Oh
wow.
Yeah, it's one of, and we've got it hanging in our workers gallery there.
Well, those Snoopies were and I suppose still are, really important and acknowledgement of what,
he's talking about the Silver Snoopy Award that is flown in space, and there's a little Snoopy, and he's running like he does. And you're sponsored by an astronaut and nominated by management to be
I hope
awarded.
that program is still in place.
Yeah, that's sure. I think it is. I kind of wanted to ask you if you thought you'd be a good Mercury, Gemini, or Apollo astronaut, and you're right in between those guys. You were a mature man when the Gemini guys were flying.
Well, Gemini to me was the most exciting program because the Mercury guys were just trying to prove that you could live, eat, and get up and get back, and so there were 6 of those guys. Deke Slayton was one of the Mercury 7, but never flew. Mm-hmm. Then the Gemini guys, because Kennedy had laid out a plan on how quickly we were going to go to the moon, and every single Gemini flight had lots and lots and lots of new stuff. The rendezvous, the way they were looking at things, what they ate. I mean, every flight was new and exciting. And if I looked back and if I was going to pick from above, the program that I would have loved to have been part of, although I loved the shuttle as well. Mm-hmm. But Gemini was just flat out and drafting on new stuff every single time to get ready for Apollo.
And not always successful. They had a lot of and not always successful. They had a lot of problems with the spacewalks.
Well, Neil
like
probably ended up as the first man to walk on the moon because of the way he handled an emergency in the Gemini program.
Yes, and that tell us about that emergency.
Well, it went out of control, and
when it docked with the Agena rocket. Yeah.
It did, and one of my titles, I was the out-of-control flight guru at the Navy Test Pilot School for a year or two. In fact, my classmate Jim Weatherby quit flying with me because he thought my number was up because of the number of out-of-control maneuvers I had done.
Really?
But
Kind of looked
Neil,
like a pelican flying up there.
oh yeah, but Neil just calmly handled it and got it back under control. And even though we're all supposed to be able to do that, who knows what you do in some of those cases. But
yeah, they were spinning out of control at one revolution a second. A stuck thruster, number 8. That we have that circuit in our Gemini gallery.
Well, good. It's a good place for it to be.
They analyzed
Museum.
that a piece of solder came loose. No circuitry, all that solder, and apparently both of them probably barfed in their helmets, being thrown around.
Well,
David
Neil
Scott was with him and may have passed out, and Neil was about to. But yes, Neil Armstrong had seven orbits of the Earth. And his next flight, he's headed to the moon on there. And
as I mentioned earlier.
Talk about him a little bit. I guess you've been around him, and a Purdue grad and all.
That was sort
Buckeye from Ohio, like me.
That was part of it, and where he really became my mentor was after I left the astronaut corps and came down to the Kennedy Space Center. And I remember one night we were in a launch countdown, and a group of us had just come out of a meeting, and we were standing by the elevator in the launch control complex when the elevator doors opened. And I was there in front of this group of people, and Neil was on the elevator. And Neil lit up like a Christmas tree. "Mike, what a pleasure to see you." My position in life was sealed when Neil did that. And I'd met him a few times. Another time with he and Gene Cernan both, I ran across a guy in New York who wanted to give away a lot of money, and he was looking for a worthwhile cause. And it was more money than I'd ever even thought about. It was a very wealthy guy. So I called Gene and Neil, and I said, "I need help." And I told them what I'd run into, and anyway, they gave me incredibly good advice, and we found a spot for this guy to put a lot of money into it. So Gene and Neil were very important to me.
We'll talk a little bit about Gene Cernan then. And of course, we've lost both these astronauts. Been about 6 or 7 years for Neil and a couple years for Gene.
Yeah.
The last man on the moon, and he had flew with Tom Stafford on another tough Gemini flight where he actually his faceplate fogged up, and Stafford had to pull him inside.
Well, I met him first when I was an ensign in Kingsville, Texas, in flight training, and he came because the guy that I was working for, a lieutenant commander, had been in a squadron with Gene earlier, and he came to Kingsville to visit this guy, and so I met him, got to talk to him, and over the years, I don't know, we just developed a friendship that lasted up until the end, pretty much.
Well, we're talking here with astronaut Mike McCulley, who is also a executive for the companies that manage the Space Shuttle launches its last 20 years. And we wanted to talk a little bit about that, about your STS-35 mission.
34.
34, sorry, yeah, correct me, 34. Oh, I forgot to do this. Yeah, Marty's always corrected me. I hate it when someone older than me has a better memory than me, Mike.
Don't give me
Marty
that
Winkle
credit.
there.
Don't give me that credit. Yeah.
Don't give you that credit. Let's go down memory lane at some of your we like talking about the shuttle because it's one of a kind legacy. John Blaha, at a talk that I heard him do at the Astronaut Encounter, said it'll be 100 years before we ever have a reusable spaceship like the shuttle, because he just said the technology and the management of it, no one wants to take it on.
You know, Bill Shepard, one of my classmates, after he retired and went back to the Navy SEALs for a while, he tried well, he went back as a consultant, not as an active SEAL. But he tried really hard to generate some enthusiasm and some money to go do the history and the research and write a document on how you design, build, operate a reusable spacecraft, since we were it. There just wasn't, he could never get any enthusiasm going for it, but he tried because of what you just said. It was such a one of a kind, and there are those who weren't a fan of it at all, of course, in the rocket business. First of all, it sat on the side of the payload, and I mean, it was just a totally different configuration. But as you said, there's a lot of lessons that are in books on shelves that may never see the light of day again.
Well, it's amazing. The more I think about it, and the more I meet astronauts and workers like Marty and other people involved with our museum, it's just an incredible management thing, and everybody's pride in it is just unparalleled. And we're going to talk about this date in space history, Mike McCulley. There were 4 space shuttles in orbit right now throughout space history. Some days there's none, and some days there's 3 or 4. And we love our Stay Curious visitors out there knowing about this legacy. And the first one we have up was in 1983, Challenger, with the STS-8 crew, with the first African-American, Guy Bluford, up there. And the commander was Dale Gardner.
No, Dale Gardner wasn't the commander.
He was the pilot, yeah, Bradenstein. No, Truly was the commander.
And Brandenstein was his pilot.
Right, okay, there we go. See, these older guys correcting me all the time. I like that. I can't read my own notes. I hate putting my glasses on, that's why. William Thornton is an interesting astronaut, and he was on that one, too.
Bill Thornton.
On there.
Dr. Bill.
And they were in space on this date in 1983 on Challenger, and that's the crew here. And then Discovery is in space in 84 with 41D that included the commander was Hank Hartsfield, okay, and the pilot Michael Coates. And so I know you were training with a lot of them.
Well, Michael Coates went on to have a great career as an astronaut, and then he went to industry for a few years, and then came back as the center director at the Johnson Space Center for several years. And he just had a great run throughout industry and government. Great guy.
Okay.
Go Navy again.
Go Navy again, that's right. Mike Mullane was on that, who wrote a very popular book, Riding Rockets, that a lot of people enjoy that. The Stephen Hawley, an astronomer guy, was on that. And Judy Resnick, this was her first space flight, and of course she flew on Challenger STS-51L, and that was her first space flight there. In 1985, so 83, 84, and 85, we had a shuttle up there, and in 85, it was 51I. All right, and we've told people before about this designation of these 10 or 12 shuttles from the numbers up to 25. And the 5 minute was the fiscal year, the national fiscal year, which goes from October to October. So you could fly a 5 flight in 1986 late after October, November. And then the 1 stood for Kennedy Space Center, and 2 was going to be Vandenberg, which we never used and never flew from there. And I is like the alphabet A, B, C, D number flight in there.
It was a very strange
And
system.
that I is so hard to tell from the L when you're looking up the history. But that had one of my
I think we had a class actually in our astronaut candidate series on how in the world somebody came up with this numbering system.
Did you really?
None of us had ever run across it.
Well, it's confusing, particularly when you have people trying to file stuff in our shuttle bins there of stuff. But this flight was the commander was Joe Engle, and pilot was Richard Covey, and loved to meet both of them. Joe Engle just turned 88 years old, and the only human to fly 2 reusable spaceships. The other one being the X-15. And I love telling the story about Joe Engle, where he got bumped, of course, on Apollo 17 by Harrison Schmitt.
Right, when they decided they needed scientists.
Yep, and he was going to be on 18, 19, or 20, but they canceled those. So I heard that they came to Joe Engle and said, well, you can be on any of the 3 Skylabs or the ASTP with the Russians. And he said, nope, I want to wait for the shuttle. I want to fly a real spaceship. Yep. Have you heard that?
Yeah, he's a piece of work. He's a wonderful man, and he was also, because of his experience, for those of us who were pilots and we're looking for a guru sometimes to tell us how the world was.
Yeah.
Joe Engel was always happy to sit down over a cold beer and give you a story about how his world was.
He had some X-15 stories too.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
sure it's just that. And of course,
And then his pilot,
Neil Armstrong was an X-15 pilot.
and truly went on to have he went back to the Navy, and was he and Tom Mattingly went back and were promoted to admiral in the Navy. I think they were the only two that did. So he was back in the Navy running the Navy Space Command at the time of Challenger, and truly came out of retirement and came back to NASA and became the NASA administrator during that return to flight phase on getting back going. And he was, I mean, we all loved having him there. Cause
You run into him these days?
not in a long time. He's out in Golden, Colorado, I think, is where he's retired.
In the third Discovery mission in space on this date, September 3rd, was as STS-128, and the commander of that was Fred Stutkow, and the pilot was Kevin Ford, and our museum friend Nicole Stott was on that mission. In fact, she was going up to do her stint on Expedition 20 or 21, I think, on the International Space Station. So we love talking about those shuttles when we do our Stay Curious program, Mike, because it's been 10 years past. There's a 30-year legacy, so that pushes here. We're going to be celebrating like crazy the 40th anniversary of STS-1, 40 years ago, and April 12th, of course, with the great John Young and Bob Crippen. And was that one of the most dangerous test pilot flights of all time?
It was awesome. You know, at the time that took place, I was the chief fixed-wing flight instructor at the Navy Test Pilot School. And with every class, you took a tour around the various test facilities in the United States, or overseas for that matter. So when John and Cripp were in quarantine, just a week or so before they were getting ready to fly, my class, or this class I had at Patuxent River, Maryland, we were at the Johnson Space Center. And those two guys came out of a simulator, and of course they were in quarantine, so we couldn't shake hands with them, but they stood there, and we gathered in front of them near the simulator building, and they talked to us for a long time about what they were doing, how they were going to do it. I mean, John and Cripp just opened up with us about what was happening. So, a few days later, we were watching on the 12th and watching them go, and we had been face to face with them. It made an incredible impression on all of us that they took that time with a group of test pilot students mostly and a few instructors with them to tell us what was going on.
That had to be something. We'll have a John Young story from you here in just a minute. But here's your crew that you're a pilot.
Who are those children?
Who are those children there? Who are all those good-looking people there? Well, your commander was Donald Williams, and I don't know much about him. But you were the pilot, and then mission specialist was Shannon Lucid, and this was, she flew, she did hold the record in space and spent
for quite a while.
4 months on the Mir space station after this. And Ellen Baker was the other mission specialist lady, and of course both of them are featured in our women's gallery with all 65 women from every country has been in space. And Franklin Chang Diaz, who had 7 flights.
Great! It was a great crew to be a part of. Don and I were a couple of white guy engineers from Purdue, but then Franklin, Costa Rican, the Chang Diaz came from a Chinese grandfather, but a Costa Rican mother. He's got a story he'll tell you. He came out of Costa Rica and ended up at MIT. 2 words of English and $2 is his story.
Yeah.
And he was in an English as a second language program, and he dropped out of that because he wanted to go hardcore. Just a brilliant guy and an awesome personality. He's still working on ion engines and things. You got Shannon, whose parents were missionaries, and she was actually born in China before World War II. She and I were the same age, so she was born in '43, and she spent the first year and a half of her life, and I don't know if it was a concentration camp, but pretty much
Really?
prison, and then grew up on an Indian reservation in Oklahoma because her parents were missionaries. Ellen Baker's maiden name is Schulman, and those are her ancestors are Jews that came out of Russia, one through the west coast and one through the east coast, and ended up meeting each other. And her mother, Claire Schulman, was the president of the borough of Queens for many, many years. Still there, but it was such an eclectic crew. And then Ellen and I had, of course, been selected together, and so we were pretty close. And then Shannon is maybe the best astronaut ever.
Really?
She had no transition. She's just amazing. And she told me in our training, she sat behind me in the MS-1 spot, and she sat behind me and she told me, Michael, if you do everything I tell you to do, just the way I tell you to do it, we're going to be just fine.
All right.
And I just gave her a yes, ma'am, and she would sit back behind me.
Yeah, he's talking about at the top deck of the space shuttle.
Shuttle.
You got the commander on the left, Mike, the pilot, being on the right, and then the seats are kind of cocked a little bit so that the two other mission specialists or whatever, they're helping you readouts and stuff like that. Right?
Well, in the simulators, particularly when you're getting all the emergencies all the time, it wasn't unusual at all for Shannon to reach around and just smack me on the side of the helmet or side of the head and point at a switch or something because that's where I was. It was, what a remarkable team ingredient.
What great memories. I mean, it doesn't seem that long ago, does it, to you?
And also the mission lasted 12 years, so since I only flew one time, you know, I had something to hold on to there for 12 years. And one day I got on an airplane. How are we doing on time?
Oh, your time is our time.
I got on an airplane in Orlando, and I was heading for Houston. And I sat down, and there was a lady sitting beside me, and we said, good morning, and then I guess she said, or I said, I don't remember, but what are you going to do? And so she was heading to a trial in Houston. And for the next half hour or so, she practiced on me, just talking what she was going to do. And then finally she turned to me and said, well, what do you do? Well, I had USA Today laying on my lap.
This is a woman talking to you on the airplane. Okay,
Just on an airplane leaving Orlando, heading for Houston. So I had a USA Today laying on my lap. And I guess it was a really quiet day in the United States or the world that day because the headline was, Galileo finds water on Europa. That was the top of it. Mm-hmm. So I very seldom tell anybody what I did, or certainly not without provocation. And I puffed up and I said, I did that. It was so cool. I loved it. And of course, she had 1,000 questions, but it was just an awesome mission. The Jet Propulsion Laboratory folks, we spent a lot of time with them.
Yeah, let's talk a little about that. Now, not to interrupt you there, but that we'll talk about. There's a launch pass that some lucky person had. Now, these are things that we put up on eBay, and of course, we have an auction September 12th, and those items are usually above $100. But we'll package a lot of this stuff together. And look at this. There's a staging safing team pass.
Yep.
All right. From the security officer there, and it's got a number 28 on it. So that's kind of a special person that probably had that, right?
Yeah, somebody.
You were all over he was all over the pad as an executive after his flight. So that's kind of why I brought that. And then we have these little payload books, and I have to hold this mic, but we've shown these before where you got a payload book, and you never dealt with these as an astronaut. These are more for workers and.
Well, they were public affairs kind of things.
Public affairs things, yeah. But they're neat to have about the mission. And then there's a press kit from there.
I probably ought to sign that for you.
All right, cool. And this press kit I find very interesting because as you open it up, NASA's saving money, and you got to flip it over around. Okay, it's not on both sides; it's flipped around.
The other day, I was going through a drawer looking for something, and I found that.
Oh, did you?
I've got it.
Really?
I've got that at the house.
Really?
I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but I've still got it.
Well, we'll find a use for it there. I was looking for my. Here's my Galileo thing. The Galileo mission was a spacecraft headed to Jupiter, to orbit Jupiter, the largest planet, of course, and it looked like this over here. Oh, I got the wrong thing open there, Marty. And we're in no hurry. There we go. So there we got the mission looking there. The Galileo spacecraft looks like that. And it was in the cargo bay of the shuttle, and Mike took it up there, and you just kind of let it go, right? And released it. But then it was actually powered to Jupiter by what's called the inertial upper stage that this whole booklet is about. Because when they got it out, and some people know about this, astronomers like me, its big antenna did not unfurl. And that was a big disappointment. And someone might say, well, the antenna didn't unfurl. Why didn't they unfurl it in the cargo bay like the Hubble telescope, worked on? So tell us, about that whole operation there and what you did when you deployed it.
Well, we spent a fair amount of time, and actually, if you look at our crew patch,
Yes, sir.
at the time we were assigned, we did the crew patch, but we didn't have Galileo on it. So we go out to the Jet Propulsion Laboratory to visit and get briefings on Galileo and some other things, and they got us off quietly in another room and fussed at us because our patch had us on it, but it didn't have them on it. So we went back, and we weren't sure whether to open the doors, close the doors on the patch, but we finally came up with the solution of laying the Galileo without the IUS, lay it on top of the shuttle for the purposes of the patch, and they were quite happy with that.
And
So-
Jupiter's in the background.
Yes,
there,
Jupiter's down in the background with the red spot. Also on the patch, there are 7 stars.
Yeah, I was
And
going to say, Mike, tell us a little about. There's a process to how you choose your patches. You all have input into it with
We
the
do,
artist,
and,
correct?
And in fact, I have to call out my wife Jane right now, because we had all these ideas in our office at the Johnson Space Center, and we weren't getting anywhere. And Jane's a really good artist, and so I just took all that stuff home that we had one night, threw it on a dining room table, and basically said, make us a patch. And this is pretty much what she did. We had to add the Galileo later on. So it was also traditional in those days to have 7 somewhere on your patch in honor of the Challenger 7. So, and also, our commander, Don Williams, insisted that we not have 34 anywhere on the patch, because he'd been through a period of time where they'd changed from 51I to, he'd been through a cycle on mission changes. So he said, we got to be generic. So he left it alone to us, and so you'll notice there are 7 stars on that patch. That's our 34. We didn't tell anybody, but the 3 on the left and the 4 stars on the right, we didn't tell Don, but we ended up putting 34 on our patch. The sun has 7 rays, and those are our 7 tributes to the Challenger 7.
Oh, nice.
It was fun.
Nice. See, every patch has a story behind it, and that I'd never heard that one told like that before. There's a book that has them on, and it credits the artists and so forth. But that's
Well, we
neat.
couldn't tell anybody. We just kept our mouths shut, the 4 of us.
Huh.
And then later on, after we were back and it was too late, we'd tell people, that's 34 and the 7. But most people assumed that the 7 stars were the 7 Challenger astronauts.
That's interesting. I can't wait to share that with people. Do you have any with the 40th anniversary of STS-1 coming up? And somebody asked me the other day, what does that stand for? It stands for Space Transportation System. And it was going to be the truck that was going to eliminate all the single-stick rockets. Everyone was going to be lined up to shoot their satellites up to space. And, of course, that all ended in January 1986 with the Challenger accident, and people had to rethink this space truck, which I think is still what is an incredible machine. Are you involved with any of the 40th anniversary things coming up yet?
No, my mantra is there's a lot of things I used to do.
Right. You're, in other words, you're enjoying life today at the moment.
Very much so.
Very much so. What is the historical perspective of the space shuttle, say, 50 years from now, when we're looking back on it like the Apollo moon landings? What will it be known for most, do you think?
Well, we flew it 135 times. We had 2 failures in there. But what we managed to do, we being NASA, the contractors, the astronauts, was to make a whole bunch and a lot of space activities routine, which weren't routine prior to that. We hadn't quite gotten there, but all those missions, a lot of the missions were the same in many ways, a lot of the secondary payloads. It allowed us to carry payloads like SSBUV, Space Shuttle Backscatter Ultraviolet. And it was an indirect way to measure what was happening to the ozone layer. We flew the first one of those, and it was a little payload bay canister, and you open it up, and all it does is look at ozone bouncing off the atmosphere, coming back up. I'm oversimplifying it, obviously. But that was they were able to fly that many times and gather data many times over. We also, tremendous amount of photography of thunderstorms from the top. At the same time, there were meteorologists on the ground looking at the bottom, which made the predictability or the prediction capability of the weather folks far superior. So there's a lot of things like that. Food, for example, and experiments that were in the lockers that weren't the big payloads like Galileo or Hubble or those things. It was stuff that allowed us to learn to work and live in space in a routine way. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean boring. It just was, you got better and better at it.
So it was really mankind learning how to live in space is what we'll look at.
Yeah, I don't know what
years from now.
I mean, space station's now been 20 years almost.
November,
Yep.
continuously occupied by your friend Bill Shepard.
Shepard
the
was
first commander.
there, first commander. And so there's been a tremendous amount of space hours accumulated by astronauts, cosmonauts, visitors, and all that sort of stuff. And in the space shuttle, 135 times, probably the average mission was 6-7 days, something like that. Mm-hmm. And then you got 5 or so people, and you add that all up, and you got thousands upon thousands of hours of experience that feeds into the system and then allows the new kids to take over and do that. And so you build on this knowledge base and this experience base to get ready to go to Mars and to go back to the moon and do some other things that need to be done along the way. And hopefully we haven't lost a lot of that experience, and a lot of it's passed on.
Yes. Good. Yeah. Well, going to Mars, we want to go to the moon first, and I know you have a wonderful story about John Young I would like for you to share. You've shared it before on YouTube. It's on there. But John Young, of course, grew up in Orlando and 6 flights. But I heard him talk. He says, yeah, I had 6 flights. I had 7 launches. And someone says, well, 7? You know, you had 6 flights. He said, the most important was the launch off the moon on Apollo 16. Okay,
That's right.
On there. But give us this beautiful story about you and John Young just flying around at night.
Well, we weren't just flying around. We had a mission. I was really fortunate in those days before I flew to be assigned to the Cape. And basically, I used to tell people that my job was to carry John Young's helmet bag. And I'd follow him around and I'd fly with him. And one night, we were getting ready to do a night launch down here. And I was in the back seat of a T-38, and John and I were doing weather reconnaissance. And it turned out to be one of those nights when there wasn't any weather within 100 miles. It was just an absolutely beautiful night. The moon was out, it was full. And we're going down the coastline, watching the moon, and I said to John, what was the moon like? And normally if I asked John a question, he'd just give me an answer and talk about it. You know, how's this feel? How's that? Well, what should I do with this? But I said, John, what was the moon like? And I didn't think he heard me because it was just silence. And there was nothing on the radio. It was just quiet. And then finally he keyed the mic and said, that was a weird place. And that was the end of the conversation. There was nothing else to ask him. I didn't say a word. He didn't say a word. But that was it. And that was John Young's description of the moon.
That was a weird place. Interesting.
Another quick John story.
Yeah.
In those shuttle training aircrafts, the reason I got to be the first pilot in my group to fly, speaking of weather, we were down here working again, and the weather was really bad between here and Houston, and so the crew that was supposed to be down that day to fly didn't make it. And the shuttle training aircraft, on the night before launch, always took the pilot and the commander up, and John always flew with them. He'd lean over the shoulder. And so that particular night, the crew wasn't able to make it. The airplane was there ready to go. And so somebody said, Mike, go get in the STA with John. So I get out there, and I got the chief of the astronaut office hanging over my shoulder. At best, I was average in my class as a shuttle pilot. I mean, all the pilots are good, and I was average. But that particular night, I was magic. It was really, really dark. And we're driving down, and after about 4 or 5 passes where I flew absolutely perfectly, I was actually praying for the airplane to break so we could quit before I knew I was going to screw up sooner or later. So we did another 3 or 4, I think it was 8 or 10 passes I did that night. And again, it was like God had my hands. It was just magic. So we get out of the airplane, back on the ground, the shuttle training aircraft, and we're walking across the ramp, and John's behind me, and he's got his hands on my shoulders, and he's bouncing up and down, telling me how wonderful it was, how great I'd done. And I remember turning around to him, and I said, John, I bet you say that to all the girls. But it was just an awesome night. And it wasn't very long after that, and if you look at the 7 pilots in my group, I mean, we were all good guys, had good careers, and were good pilots, and later on, the STA instructors told me, we all were doing fine. But and in those days, George Abbey picked the crews, John picked the pilots. And so I was the first one. And it was because that particular night, it was serendipitous that I was there to fly, and to fly with John, and then to just do everything right. And so John declared me number 1 to fly.
What an honor!
And
I never
first
lost
of
the Maggot pilots to fly.
That's true. There. What a great
well,
epitaph. You
had your flight, and I think it's a serendipitous that you got into management, because you mentioned that the list was pretty long for people to fly, and but you had an opportunity. And you first tell us a little bit about that.
Well,
where you got involved with Lockheed Martin.
Well, I flew STS-34 and came back, and the astronaut office sent me to to Florida as what was called the Cape Crusader, the lead astronaut support person. So I spent all of 1990 pretty much going back and forth between Florida and JSC, and a couple things happened. I fell absolutely, totally head over heels in love with the Kennedy Space Center. At the same time, the Kennedy Space Center liked me. So Honeycutt, who you're going to have here next Thursday night.
Yes, we are, Jay Honeycutt.
At the Olive Garden on Merritt Island one night, it was Honeycutt and me and 2 or 3 other folks around. And Jay looked at me, and you can ask him, see if he says this story the same way next week. Jay said to me, "Are you ready to get a real job?" And I said, "What do you mean real job? I got a real job. I'm in line to go fly as the commander or whatever." And he said, "No." Anyway, he was recruiting me. And so I went back to Dan Brandenstein, who was chief of the astronaut office at that time. And I told Dan, and the line was long to go fly again. And so I went into Dan and said, "I got a job offer, and I'm trying to decide what to do. And tell me when I'm going to fly again. And am I going to fly as a pilot or a commander?" And he said, "Well, 4 or 5 years, and you're going to fly as a pilot again." And I was pretty old when I got there. I came later than many of them, and I looked that up. I added it all up. And anyway, I said, "I'm not waiting." I'm not a big fan of simulators. I loved flying. I'd gotten that check in the box, to use Honeycutt's term. You've been there, done that. Nobody will ever know the difference whether you flew once or 6 times. And so Jane and I, it didn't hurt that she's a Melbourne girl. Okay. And the kids were at the right point to make a move. 2 of them were already in college or almost there. The kids were coming along. Anyway, I made the decision to, as I mentioned earlier, 2 hard things about being an astronaut. One's getting there and one's leaving. And I came down here, and They weren't exactly sure what to do with me. Lockheed had a lot of talented people that came out of the aircraft world, both West Coast and Georgia. What they didn't have was somebody that could truly connect the dots between processing the space shuttles and all the hardware and the people that were going to fly it. And I came in down here as Marty will remember, I was the deputy launch site director. And it was a perfect job for a guy who'd been in the military since he was 17 years old, because I worked for a guy named Dan Patterson, old Union guy in Lockheed, hard-nosed guy, but you know, I needed, what I had was about 4 years there to learn and get involved wherever I wanted to get involved, do the things I wanted to do, got heavily involved with integration and flow management, got involved with the unions, and I never had any experience dealing with the unions, and then the Lockheed guys were really good about sending me off to some schools to learn some business things, and it was an awesome 4 or 5 years there. And then Patterson went on to someplace else in Lockheed, and I got the job as the launch site director, and it was the best job out of all the jobs I've had in my life. Being the launch site director at the Kennedy Space Center was my #1 job by far of everything, including astronaut, test pilot, all those things which are excited. And then, Chris Kraft went off and did a study and said, well, if we're going to get the cost of the program down, we need an integrating contractor, or whatever his term was. And that's when Boeing, Rockwell, Lockheed Martin started hovering and messing around and created United Space Alliance. And so I went from being my title was launch site director for Lockheed to being associate program manager for USA. But it was all part of building that whole complex. And, you know, we started out with a few companies. By the time, a year or two later, we were, I think, 27 contracts and 19 companies or something that had gone into USA. And it was awesome. You know, we saved $1 billion in the first 3 or 4 years. Over the planned operating plan, we took that much out, and we never laid off one single person, which was a big deal. We let attrition, we'd bring in a Thiocol or a USBI or whatever it was, and we didn't leave anybody outside. We brought everybody in. Nobody ever came in with any cut in their pay or benefits. And NASA was very supportive of that, because one of their fears was that by consolidating, they were going to lose talent, lose skills, but that wasn't our direction. And so it was fun. And then you'd take, over a period of time, people would leave, and you could look and pick and choose. And we didn't discriminate between badges just because we were Lockheed or Boeing originally, or Lockheed or whatever it was. And USA was an awesome experience, and that was 17 years of my life between Lockheed and USA. And I loved that 17 years every bit as much as I loved the previous 30.
And you were involved with well over 50 shuttle flights, or probably more like 80. Excuse me. And he became the president of USA. And somebody was that I was talking about, you said that you were really proud to be named the coup. Someone come up to me and says, "Yeah, Mike come up and said, I'm the coup now."
Chief Operating Officer.
Right,
That's what, yeah.
That's why I put coup on there for you
yeah.
there. On there.
Well, that was another interesting one. I was a deputy program manager in Houston. They'd moved me from here to Houston, which I thought I was getting fired.
Oh, really?
Because, well, I was fairly protective of the Kennedy Space Center, and some of the folks took that as unwillingness to join this team. So they moved me out to Houston in the deputy program manager slot. And I remember I was running the PRCB, the Program Requirements Board out there, and one day I made a decision. It was Lockheed and the former Lockheed guys and the former Rockwell guys had a disagreement on which direction we were going to go on something. And I don't remember what it was, but I decided on the Rockwell approach. And one of the guys out in Rockwell, he didn't key the mic, but the mic was hot. McCulley's not doing too bad at this equal opportunity stuff, and he didn't realize it came over the mic. But it's just Howard DeCastro was the program manager at that time, and a very good one. And he once told me, and I'll get this almost right, he said, "You change jobs better than anybody I've ever seen." And I laughed, and I said, "Well, I'll take that as a compliment, but the way I work is I get a job, and I focus totally on that job." And so I went from being his deputy to being his boss when I went from deputy program manager to COO. And there was never an issue with that to me. Nobody was sure how that was going to happen, except I knew, because the chief operating officer job was a huge job. And so I just focused on that. And so sometime later he said, "You change jobs better than anybody I've ever known." It was one of the best compliments from sort of I don't know, career point of view or whatever that I ever got.
Were you ever considered to be KSC director?
I had, yes.
Okay.
It's a little known and not part of the history books anywhere. But the answer is,
Stay Curious it is now.
yeah. But the answer is yes. I could have probably been the center director at either Kennedy or Johnson, and in fact, I wrote Dan Golden. He brought me to D.C. on short notice, and I had an interview, as it turned out, at a restaurant on Pennsylvania Avenue one night, and it was he and a couple other guys, and they were feeling me out, and I'd only been down here in that Lockheed job for less than a year at that point, and I wrote a letter to Dan, and I still have the letter, and I said, I appreciate your confidence in me and your willingness to do this with me, but there's a lot of things I haven't finished doing yet here, and I want to stay here and keep doing that.
Well, here's a picture I'm going to show of you from the old days there. And as you look at that, and before I show our Stay Curious people, our board member, Larry Osterly,
Yeah.
you know Larry,
Oh, yeah.
and Larry's a DBIS Award winner.
Yes,
And
win well deserved.
And well, Larry said about you, he said wherever Mike went, he was a key to improving the overall team.
Wow.
And he said one thing Mike really liked being around hardware.
I do.
And there you are. Here, there's a photograph of you greeting the STS-82 crew after they landed at night. And you just.
But I'll tell you, that was my favorite. But you mentioned Janine Pape earlier.
Yes.
And also when I first got out of the astronaut
Janine Pape is what's her title, Marty, when she worked out there?
Director, LPS.
Director,
launch processing.
Launch processing, yeah.
Software world.
Okay, there you go.
It's the software world. And so even though I loved hardware, the area that I was weak in going into the astronaut corps was software. And even though I'd used computers, I didn't know them. So the first job I had as an astronaut was the astronaut office rep to the software community. And it was an eye-opener for me, and I made friends there that lasted even to this day. And then I get down here and meet people like Marty and Janine and others who can run circles around me on my knowledge about how integration works. And it's easy to master for somebody with my background, an engineer and a pilot, to master individual systems. What was really difficult for me and took more time was to master the integration of all those complicated systems. And I had people that knew that so well. And anyway, I was fortunate to have people like Marty and Janine mentoring me.
Well, I was going to ask you, I am going to ask you, what makes a good manager? But we talked a little earlier, and I suspect it has to do around these two words you shared with me, curiosity and tenacity.
Yeah, those are two words I use when I talk to children a lot. The curiosity makes you want to know stuff. Tenacity goes back to my rule of threes. I mentioned earlier I tried 3 times to get into college, and because I didn't have the money or couldn't play football well enough or that other stuff. But finally, on the 3rd try, the Navy sent me to Purdue. And 4.5, 5 years later, I'm actually the answer to a trivia question at Purdue. Which Purdue engineering graduate got his master's degree before he got his bachelor's degree? And the answer my department head told me was me. And the reason was, when I was a junior, I was working extra hours for money as a lab technician for a PhD guy. And he disappeared one day. And it was a DARPA original research project, a very important, well-funded project out of defense world. And and I knew I didn't know the theories, and I hadn't had enough knowledge on materials yet to really understand it. But I was the only guy around who knew how to run that equipment because I had built it. I even took a class in glass blowing so I could build an apparatus that would measure pressure. At any rate, they huddled and came to me, and the Navy had a rule that you go to on your scholarship, but you get the heck out of there as soon as you can. Get your degree and go. So they had to go back to the Navy and sell the Navy on leaving me there an extra year. And so what I did, and Purdue had a requirement for a job finding 1-hour course in your senior year at that time. And what they did was held that out, and then I worked master's degree and bachelor's degree simultaneously for that year and a half or whatever it was. And then when we got to the end, they just gave me a waiver for that. And so the master's ceremony was in the morning, and the bachelor's ceremony was in the afternoon. And that's
an interesting trivia question for sure. Interesting.
So the threes, though, let me continue with the threes there.
Curiosity,
so it took me
tenacity,
3
and your
times,
threes
and I
there.
tell kids this 3 times. My granddaughter, who's just graduated from Vanderbilt in pre-med, I tried 3 times to get into Vanderbilt and failed. They didn't want me, but they took her, and she did well.
You're
I gave
proud of her. What's her name?
Her name is Skylar Johnson.
Skylar Johnson.
Yep.
All right.
And
Congratulations.
she's at the National Institute of Health right now.
All right. Ooh, she's
Waiting
busy with the COVID stuff.
Yeah, med school's coming up.
Cool.
Well, then, when it came time, I decided I wanted to be a test pilot. I had the engineering background, and I really liked what I was doing. It took me 3 tries to get into test pilot school. But that's the tenacity part of it. Don't give up, keep trying. And on my 3rd application to test pilot school, I got it. I applied 3 times to the Astronaut Corps. I got it on the 3rd time. Just kept trying. In fact, I wasn't even going to try. The 2nd time I tried, the Navy had an age limitation, and I exceeded that, and so they wouldn't even look at my application. Well, then 4 years later, I get a call from a friend of mine who's doing the secretariat work on the selection board for the Navy pilots going to NASA. And he called me, and I was in Jacksonville, Florida on a detachment. He tracked me down one night, and he said, "Hey, I'm going through all these applications, and you're not in here." And I laughed, and I said, "Well, Chris, 4 years ago I was too old." And he said, No, there was an age discrimination lawsuit. They took all that age stuff out. So I wrote a postcard. "Dear Chris, application to follow Mike." And I got it. There's a post office in White House. It's on I-10. And I found out somehow that they were open on 2nd shift because of something they did. Anyway, I got that thing postmarked that night and followed it up with an application. And so then I thought, well, they had to change the rules because somebody sued them. But we'll find out if they changed their attitude or not. And so I applied, made the application. And then NASA does groups for application for interviews and physicals at that time. And I knew that was going on, and I hadn't gotten a call to come. And then on a Thursday afternoon, we run out of time?
No.
Okay. On a Thursday afternoon, I was in Oceana, Virginia, getting ready for a nuclear weapons inspection that was key to career for squadrons. It was a big, big deal, and I was in charge of it. So I get a call from the secretary on a Thursday afternoon saying they need me in Houston on Sunday. Oh, really? Well, I can't do it. So I hung up on this lady whose name was Teresa Gomez. Well, she called her boss, who called this boss, who called an admiral, called so finally my commanding officer calls me and said, "What the hell did you do?" And he looked at me and said, "They want you in Houston on Sunday. Go." So I bought my own plane ticket. I didn't have any orders, didn't have anything, just get on an airplane. So I get on an airplane in Norfolk, Virginia on Sunday morning. Drink a couple, remember those days they had little bottles of wine on airplanes?
Yeah.
Had a couple bottles of wine, get to Atlanta, change airplanes. Well, one of my previous test pilot students Barry Waddell was getting on the same airplane I was getting on out of Atlanta for Houston. We were both going to go interview for the astronaut corps. So I sit down again, I order another bottle of wine. And Barry's sitting over my shoulder. Mike, what are you doing? What do you mean, what am I doing? He said, didn't you read the letter? What letter? And the end of this story is that I was the last guy in the last interview group to being added on the next to the last day.
Whoa.
And so somebody fell out for whatever reason. So off I go. And by that time, I'd had 4 bottles of wine. Those little bottles.
Yeah.
And we gathered
there.
we gathered that afternoon when we got there, and he gave me his letter, and it said, "Don't drink for a week. Don't do this." I mean, there's all kinds of rules about
wow.
Well, nobody told me any of that crap. So we get there, and John Young is giving us a little speech about what the week is going to be like, and I'm about half lit, and we started our urinalysis that afternoon, and the really funny thing was I passed the urinalysis and Barry Waddell failed.
Oh, really? He was drinking liquor, so wine maybe.
Something. I don't know what it was, but
that's it. Well, those are great stories. The tenacity. You're here with astronaut Mike McCulley on our Stay Curious program.
also, since let me tell you right now that I'm going to give you $1,000 today.
You are?
I am.
Well, God bless you.
And y'all look at this, and you don't have to match me, but you might think about it.
All right. There's a challenge from Mike McCulley, who's giving us $1,000
Stay curious.
today.
There we go.
And you can go to our website, AmericanSpaceMuseum.org, and click the donate button, or info@American Space Museum, or call us. We'll take care of that. Thank you, Mike. You're such a great supporter of our museum here. And I was looking around at some the tie in our little conversation here. We've had a great time. I got a few more things to bring up. Just before I get away from your management style here, another one of people that you know, they said, well, we called him One Slide Mike. And I go, what do you mean? He said he'd throw one slide up there at a meeting and he'd talk for an hour and he wouldn't use any notes. It was so impressive, he said, in there. And, but you are a hell of a manager. You are so well beloved by the people who work for you. And you know, you would have made a great Kennedy Space Center director. We've got a question up there, Mike. Any Irish or Scottish links?
You know,
McCulley.
Well, Scotch-Irish, I guess. I get these different stories, but I'll tell you what, Jane did 23andMe. Is that what it's called? Or 23andYou?
DNA thing?
23andMe. 23andMe. Jane did that, and it came back yesterday, and it's absolutely incredible how much knowledge and how much information about her and her family, and I mean, hard numbers. It's just amazing. And while I have really no innate desire to know any of that stuff, she had so much stuff came with it, I may just have to go do that and find out.
All right. Aaron Gobrow, right?
Aaron Gobrow.
Aaron Gobrow.
Well, I did read one time there was some McCulleys in England, and they were Huguenots from France.
Oh.
And when they came over to get away from persecution in France, they changed to a British name so that they wouldn't be persecuted for being French Huguenots. I tried to verify that. I read it someplace. Who knows? So maybe I'll do 23andMe.
23andMe. Well, we're winding up here, but you were mentioning Marty Winkle, our wonderful co-producer and cameraman, that he'd run circles around you in the computer things in there.
Well, he also ran circles around me in marathons.
Yeah, that's why we brought this here, to talk as a segue to why we have this here. And tell us a little bit of story about Marty Winkle and marathon running.
Well, Marty, I'd always been a jogger. And I'd done I don't know how many 5Ks and 10Ks over the years. But Marty was my inspiration for stepping up to the marathon, half marathon. And actually back in '96, when the Olympics were in Atlanta,
yes,
the torch came through here.
Let's get that up here to show. 1996 Olympic torch is what you're looking at here, and tell us a little bit about that story.
Well,
I bring this picture of Marty lighting the torch at the Kennedy Visitors complex.
Well, and even before that, there's another picture you got there of
Oh.
what was called Beat the Boss.
Okay.
And Marty was instrumental in creating a 5K race on the beach. And we did it on a low tide day every year, worked out the whole schedule. And over time, we involved the Air Force and everybody, and it was Beat the Boss. And he and his devious cohorts designed the ugliest, awfulest shirts that anybody could ever imagine for the bosses.
Okay.
And they wore really cool shirts, and we had these ugly things. And, oh yeah, peach or pink or whatever it was. Anyway, it turned out to be, Marty led this whole thing, and it turned out to be just a really, really good morale-boosting event. Like I said, at the end we involved Patrick, the Air Force guys in it, and in fact, we had different winners until we got the Air Force, and then the Air Force guys came in and beat us all the time. But those guys were serious. But anyway, kudos to Marty for being a major player, not just from a technical point of view, but from morale and the company and all the things that we did. And the torch was a big part of it in '96. I had
the torch.
I carried the torch from about south, probably 18th Street up A1A. They asked me if I wanted to carry it to the pad, but since I lived in Cocoa Beach, I made a decision I'd rather do it on my home turf. And Lawrence Shriver actually carried the torch up the pad B, I think, and came back around. So we had 2 or 3 astronauts, Lauren and I for sure, and maybe somebody else that year. I can't remember. But anyway, I've still got it in the garage, and I was looking at it a few days ago trying to figure out what I'm going to do with it.
But there's Marty lighting the cauldron at ASC with the final run of that.
Yeah.
And
That was really a great day. That thing started Saturday morning and down around maybe south of Patrick on A1A, and I don't remember how many runners we had, Marty, but probably 30 or 40 before the day was over. Oh, yeah. It was just an awesome experience.
Well, glad sharing that. Marty's been involved with this running stuff for 3 decades, 4 decades.
You were supposed to light the cauldron.
I was, but I decided to stay in Cocoa Beach because that was my home, and you guys did the cauldron.
Yeah, I only did it because you asked them to have me do it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I wanted it.
What an honor.
Well,
and this is in a place of honor at Marty's house.
The residents of Cocoa Beach were honored that I made a decision, I don't know if they all knew it or not, that I was going to run on my home turf and not at the pad.
That's neat. Cool.
Which has a lot to do with my management style too, but that's a different story.
Well, we see your management style is delegating, rewarding the people and that do their jobs. And,
it was interesting when I first came down here. There was so much I didn't know and so much I wanted to know. So I would go, as many of them remember, at 5:30 in the morning when the meetings first started for the OPF for the day. And Eric Clanton used to say he couldn't see to the back of the room. His eyes were so bad. But he'd see. I had this brown sports coat that my father-in-law gave to me, and I wore it a lot. And all Eric knew was I was in the back of the room. But it was interesting how some of the folks took it because they confused my desire for micro-knowledge with what they viewed as micromanagement. Until after a while, they figured out that he's sitting in the back of the room at those engineering meetings because he wants to know stuff, not because he's going to try to manage it.
Mm-hmm. Micro-knowledge versus micromanagement.
It took a while for them to, because I did. I was 7 days a week, third shift in the VAB. I mean, all this stuff was part of my domain, and I wanted to know the same way I was exactly the same way on an aircraft carrier. Mm-hmm. I was down in the bilges, or I was in the engine room, or I was in the galley, figuring out what they were doing there. It's just, if I've got this responsibility, then I want to know as much as I can about it without trying to manage it. Because, as Howard de Castro said, you do a better job of changing jobs than anybody ever seen. That's because I'm incapable. And I don't mean this in a self-serving way. I can't do 2 jobs. I focus on the job I've got, and the job I used to do is something I used to do. And that's
That's some good advice out there. Good. Our Stay Curious listeners out there. As we're winding down here, we got any other questions, Marty? We got your favorite astronaut.
Mine?
I guess your favorite astronaut is what they're asking you.
Oh, it would be John.
Mm-hmm.
John Young.
Yeah.
Just simply because, and his deputy was a guy named P.J. Whites in the astronaut office when we went, and they were just so demanding on us. I mean, what we needed to learn, but just so nurturing and so aimed at getting you ready to do what you're going to eventually do. So I'd have to say John for me.
That comes to mind, Mike. One of the things I've learned being around these space workers, the 3 years I have, and talking particularly to people like Bob Seek and the Gemini and Apollo era, was when you made a mistake, you didn't have any fear of like getting fired for that mistake. As long as you were up front and say, I did this wrong and I think this happened. The NASA mentality was, what did we do to not train you for this failure?
Well, and you brought up Bob Seek. I'm glad you did, because Seek and I were the contractor government counterparts for those whole 7 years I was down here.
Oh.
And I couldn't have asked for anything more. I mean, and it was just remarkable. If we had a little issue going maybe on something, Bob and I would go in and close the door and never try to point out a fault. I mean, it was just that relationship I had with Bob Seeker that he and I had together was one of the highlights among relationships in all of my jobs and all my careers.
Oh, wonderful.
He's an awesome man.
Yeah, he certainly is. He's our outgoing treasurer here at our museum. Yeah. And maybe we'll get him to match that $1,000.
Look, I said my piece, and I mean it, and I'll back out of the way for
Lee
now.
Solid's probably listening too out there, but no, Bob Seek, got great respect for him. Launched 51 shuttles. You were involved with him in launching shuttles, and but his management and just managing the whole thing and what he did behind the scenes is just amazing. We've got. Tip Talone Tip Talone's watching.
That's dangerous.
Is that dangerous? Oh, okay. Yeah, Tip, we'd love to have you on Stay Curious one day. Would he be a good guest?
I got a couple of really good tip stories, but I'm not going to tell them.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. Well, tell us a little bit about here at the ending. I can tell and have met your wife. You've been in love with your wife for a long, long time.
Have.
And you and her enjoy taking your fur babies around on trips. And the last time we spoke, you talked about going up the 50th anniversary last year of Apollo 11, that you and your wife Jane took off in an RV, was it? And you went up to Niagara, and then you went up in Canada?
Well, we were in a backwoods north of Lake Superior, little backwoods campground when you guys were doing the 50th anniversary.
But you were asked, you told me, to come back, and you guys just decided you're having too much fun up there to
they wanted come back for the anniversary. And no, that's something I used to do. Heard that before.
Yeah, and I asked this man, I said, so did you get a flat tire or something and had to pull out the astronaut card? And you told me you went 4 months completely anonymous, except for one time. Did you talk to some engineering students?
Yes.
Yeah, because I was like, and he doesn't brag about being an astronaut, but if it comes up,
Well, we were in a campground north of Sault Ste. Marie, up in, I guess that's Ontario there, and at the campground, a whole bunch of college kids showed up, and they were camping in tents out on the side. And in talking to one of them, they were all engineering students out of a university in Quebec. Mm-hmm. But they were all science and engineering. And at that point, and also Jane had to go back to the States for a few days. And so I had a couple of days there pretty much alone with the fur babies. Uh-huh. And
Shih Tzus, right?
Shih Tzus in a lab. And the Shih Tzus are 10 pounds, the lab is 90. Wow. He's 2 years old, they're 11. They raised him.
Oh, okay.
And they totally control him.
Oh, wow, that's got to be fun.
But I did. I quietly told the two leaders of the group that who I was and what I had done, and I'd be more than happy to spend some time with the whole group. And it was awesome because we were in a park in a little like a cabana thing. There was a little over 100 of them, as I recall, and I spent 2 or 3 hours with them, sharing space stories, and it was just, they had great questions, and it was an awesome experience with them.
Well, you are an awesome gentleman and a great friend of our museum, and we're so pleased that you took your time and to help our listeners out there stay curious. Any more comments, Marty?
And thank you all who are listening for having the interest and the commitment to listen to this show and learn and maybe get motivated, maybe throw a buck in the bucket somewhere along the line. It's impressive what you guys have created as not a stopgap, but as a substitute for what you normally do when the museum is open and going. So nice job.
Well, our
you.
executive director, Karen Conklin's over there, and Bruce Jacobs, our IT guy here, and Marty, and
Nice work.
our whole
Nice
crew
work
here.
for the whole
is,
team.
A real it's been a silver lining for sure, because we never imagined doing anything like this.
Well, it works.
And what a nice way to have a conversation with a wonderful astronaut who's also been one of the major leaders of the Space Shuttle era, Mike McCulley. Marty?
No other questions, but there's probably 90 thank yous and 90 comments to Mike, and that's far more than we've ever had from anyone else.
Yes. More than Janine Pape?
I tried to
And
go back and
teased you,
count
you
them. I quit counting at 60 comments.
Wow.
Those people that Mike knows, his grand. I think
They're
one of your
thanking you
nephews
for
maybe.
being your boss is what they're doing.
Well, it goes the other way around. It's the other way around. I told you earlier that out of all the jobs that I had and all the different things that I did, leading this team was the finest experience in my life.
Well, it shows, and it's left a lasting legacy on the American space program for sure. That will be thought about truly 50 years from now. So, with that, I'm Mark Marquette, and we're going to say goodbye to our good friend here, Mike McCulley, and thank him immensely for supporting our museum. And we hope that you can support us also. And next week, we're going to have Jay Honeycutt here. 2 years. He was Kennedy Space Center director, launched 14 shuttles during that 2 years, the heyday of the program in 95 and 96.
You sure 14's the right number? I would have said more than that, but
I'll have to go do some more ciphering.
well, he was he was the center director for 2 years, but before that he was director of operations.
Yes,
so his whole tour at KSC, there was a whole lot more.
There's a lot more to him than just the directorship.
Yeah, and
we can't wait to talk.
Well,
to him
and
about
I told you earlier, he was responsible for getting me here, and I've been forever grateful. In fact, he and I are still close friends.
And we'll have him here next Thursday. Yes, Marty.
Mike, Marla says, great job, Dad.
You're welcome, Marla. She's my oldest girl.
Good. Well, again, thank you, Mike McCulley, for embracing our museum and being here to help our friends stay curious. I'm Mark Marquette, and Mike, we'll see you again to bridge the space between us.